So I want you to turn to the person sitting next to you, and I want you to tell them that you're a genius. Hold on. All right. How many people in this audience believe that their thoughts have something to do with their destiny? How many people believe that? So I got to know who I'm talking to here, right? Wow. That's really good. So now here's my next question. How come, as human beings, we keep creating the same circumstances in our life? The same job, the same relationships, the same conditions. How come nothing new happens in our life? I mean, if we accept that belief that our thoughts and our feelings produce our future, then the next question would be, what's happening in my life? Is there anything new happening? Now, quantum physics tells us that there are infinite potentials in the quantum field. In other words, there are innumerable experiences that are waiting as possibility for every single person. And that transcends culture and gender and race and political beliefs and intellectual ability. In other words, if you're alive and your heart is beating and you have a brain, you're creating reality, or you're creating your destiny based on how you're thinking and feeling. And nobody is excluded. Isn't that nice? So, how many people here saw the movie What the Bleep Do We Know? Did you like that movie? You know why you liked that movie? Because it was about you. It was about all of us. It spoke to your potential. It spoke to your possibility to change your mind. Quantum physics tells us, geniuses, that the environment is an extension of our mind. Now, if we change our mind, shouldn't something show up differently in our life? Come on, do you believe that?
Yes.
Yes.
So if mind, then, is this process of thinking and feeling, then we have to say, then, that our habitual self that we've memorized as a personality, as an identity, is thinking the same thoughts every day and feeling the same feelings every single day. And yet we're expecting a different result in our life. Isn't that insanity? To do the same things and think the same way and expect something to change? So geniuses, think about this. If we know that the environment is an extension of our mind, and we really change our mind, the quantum field of potentials should give us some feedback in our life. And then our life becomes a scientific experiment where we get to see that the events and the opportunities that unfold are equal to the way we think or how well we've changed our mind. Now, how hard is it to change your mind? Now, I'm not talking about ordering chocolate ice cream instead of vanilla ice cream. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about fundamentally mind, body, and soul. Now, every time you have a thought, you make a chemical. And if you have great thoughts, or unlimited thoughts, or happy thoughts, you make chemicals that make you feel great, or feel unlimited, or feel happy. In other words, this immaterial thing called thought activates certain circuits in our brain that produce chemicals that signal the body so that we can begin to feel exactly the way we were just thinking. And if you have a negative thought or an unhappy thought or a self-depreciating thought, in a matter of seconds you begin to feel negative or unhappy or unworthy. That's how fast it works. So the thought then, our thinking, turns on chemistry in our brain and in our body that allows us to feel exactly the way we were just thinking. Now, the moment we begin to feel the way we're thinking, because the brain is in constant communication with the body, we begin to think the way we're feeling, which then makes more chemicals for us to think the way we feel, and then feel the way we think the way we feel, and feel the way we think. And this process of thinking and feeling and thinking creates a state of being. Then we say, I am unhappy, because I thought unhappy thoughts and I felt unhappy. And then once I was feeling unhappy, I started to think more unhappy thoughts, which makes me feel more unhappy. And this process of thinking and feeling and thinking creates the state of being, listen closely, in which we memorize an emotional state that we call our identity. I'm guilty. I'm suffering. I'm unworthy. I am insecure. And as this process of thinking and feeling continues, if we can't think greater than how we feel, we'll never change. And if feelings become the means of thinking, and we can't think greater than how we feel, we're caught in an identity. To change, to truly change, is to think greater than how you feel. So, imagine now. Let's suppose you were thinking and feeling and thinking guilty thoughts that made you feel guilty. Just making it up. And the moment you begin to feel guilty, because you're feeling guilty, you begin to think guilty thoughts because you're feeling that way, which then makes more chemicals for you to feel and then think and feel. And you do that, say, for, I'm going to be conservative, 20 years. And that's because you inherited certain genetic patterns from your parents. Now, you know what you inherit from your parents? What they master emotionally. So if your mother was a master at suffering and guilt, because she was thinking and feeling and feeling and thinking, there's a good possibility one of the offspring are going to have those neurological circuits already patterned in place. Oh, no. But neuroscience and psychology tells us that's only 50% of who we are. That it's the environment, then, that we can shape and change our brains. That our genetics are the starting point in our life. But what if you're raised by the same people with the same emotional propensities? So we begin to think and feel because we're conditioned and we have the genetics in place to memorize the state of guilt and suffering. Have I lost anybody yet? No? Okay, so now let's pretend now you have this moment of enlightenment. And you say, today I stop. I'm not going to complain. I'm not going to blame. I'm not going to make excuses. And if you're Italian, I'm not going to have self-pity. I'm not going to feel bad. I'm going to stop. Basta. That's right. So now, you're no longer going to think the same thoughts that are going to make the same feelings. Right? You're going to say, I stop. So, 2 hours goes by, and you feel really good about yourself. But now the body, who's been conditioned over time to that cycle of chemistry for 20 years, the body, the cells of the body, have modified the receptor sites to make more room for the chemicals of guilt. And the cells of the body, they go like this. What is she doing up there? We have changed our receptor sites. We've modified our chemistry. This continuity is pretty reliable. And all of a sudden, she's going to stop today. We can't have that. So all the cells of the body, they get together. And they say, let's send a message to the brain. So now they send a message up the spinal cord, right up to the circuits of the brain. I call that the fast track. Straight up. Now, at the same time, the chemistry of the body, the chemistry of guilt has lowered. Because you're not thinking and feeling the same way. So, values have lowered. And the thermostat in the brain, called the hypothalamus, says, values are going down. We got to make more. So it starts to signal the thinking brain to start to think in its habitual ways. And then the next thing you know, You start to hear these thoughts in your head, the chatter. And it starts to say things like, you can start tomorrow. Tomorrow's a better day. Not today. Or how about this one? Any other time but this time. This is a good reason to suffer. And of course, my favorite is, this doesn't feel right. And the moment we believe in that thought, the moment we listen to those sub-vocalizations in our brain, we immerse ourselves back into that automatic program and we return back to the normal self. Now, psychology tells us that 90% of who we are subconscious programs that we've memorized. 10% of our conscious mind is fighting against 90% of our subconscious automatic programs. So the person may consciously want to be happy. They may consciously want to be healthy. They might consciously want to be free. But the 20 years of guilt and suffering, the redundancy of those chemicals has conditioned the body to be the mind. And when the body becomes the mind, that's called a habit. A habit is when the body's become the mind. So the change then is to pull the mind out of the body and put it back in the brain. So, think about this. How many people here could, at some point in their life, couldn't consciously remember a phone number? And then they pick up the phone, they look down at the number, the keypad, and they go like this. And they dial the number. I mean, what's up with that? In other words, your conscious thinking brain couldn't remember it. But you practiced it so many times that your body knew better than your brain. Now, that is where our emotional reactions exist. That's where our personality and our behaviors stem from. Memorized automatic programs. And psychology tells us by the time we're 35 years old, the identity, the you and the me, the personality is completely formulated. Which means we have memorized a set of behaviors, a set of attitudes, a set of beliefs, a set of perceptions that are unconsciously programmed within us. So the person may consciously want to be happy, but their body has been conditioned to be the mind, and it's conditioned to be unhappy. So the mind and the body are in opposition. And when mind and body are in opposition, and the body has been conditioned to be the mind, the servant, which is the body, has become the master. And the master has gone off to sleep for 20 years. And now the master wants to get back on the throne. What's the servant going to say? Where you been? You don't know any of this stuff. So mind and body in opposition is the biggest reason people can't change. And when the conscious mind is going against 90% of that subconscious automatic state of mind. And when that program runs, when the automatic program begins, it's so memorized that it only takes a stimulus from the environment, from a person or a thing, or a stray thought in our own mind, and it cranks the program, it starts the program, and we go unconscious. So how awake are we during our normal day? So then, how do we change? I mean, how do we begin to make conscious what was unconscious? Because when that automatic program runs, it's like when your computer, how many people here, when your computer all of a sudden starts doing crazy things, the programs, and you start going, the windows start coming up and the program's gone out of control? Yeah, all the time. So the conscious mind trying to change that automatic program would be like you yelling at the computer, hey, stop, stop. The computer's going to keep doing what it does. It doesn't change. So we have to learn how to get into the program, into the operating systems, and begin to unlearn that state of mind and relearn a new state of mind. So then you can begin to see why our prayers aren't answered. If a person prays with intention to be free with their mind, but their body has been conditioned to guilt, mind and body, their whole being is not in the prayer. So when we said, rejoice in your prayers, it means then that you have to condition the body with a new mind. And when mind and body are working together, the heart is open. When mind and body are working together, the power of the universe is moving through us. And so then, you know, I'm so happy to see so many men in the audience. Because when I lecture, most of the time it's women. But you know, Latinos, they have a great balance between their head and their hearts. They really do. And men's brains work very differently than women's brains. Women? Men? Yes? Now, I love to study functional brain scans. I love them. And if you look at a functional brain scan, is a motion picture of the brain. And when we can see the brain in action, or we can see the brain at work, that's called mind. Mind is what the brain does. And with functional scans, we can see how the brain and mind are working. Now, ladies, if you look at a functional brain scan of a man resolving a problem, very single-minded, very same pattern. And if you say to the man, I'll give you a little hint to help you solve the problem. If you give them the hint, the scan doesn't change. You know, like when your husband's driving along and you're lost, and you say the map says this, and he doesn't listen, he goes the way he thinks he should go. That's because men are very single-minded. 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 Intentional. Clear. Single-minded. That's why when they go Christmas shopping, they go out and they buy one present. They come home. They cross the name off the list. They wrap the present, put it under the tree, go back out the same day, hunt again, buy the second present, come home, cross the name off, wrap the next present. Very linear. Very methodical. Most of the men are very serious right now. That's the male brain. Now, men's brains are wired for intention, for activity, for single-mindedness. Now, if you look at a functional brain scan of a woman resolving a problem, oh my God. Gentlemen, it's like a lightning storm going on in there. You know how women can change their mind 10 times in 1 second? I was in a relationship with a woman one time, and when she started talking to me, I'd say, wait, tell me what you're going to say last first. Because I don't have a lot of time. Oh, I'm having fun now. So, women's brains genetically, gentlemen, men were hunters. Go out, provide, come back, protect. Simple, basic rules. Awareness in terms of protection and survival. Women's brains, because they took care of the young, because they took care of the whole, everybody. When they made decisions, they considered everybody. The youngest child to the oldest woman, and everybody in between. They considered the whole. They considered the community. And so their brains work in a very holistic fashion. They're considering all possibilities at the same time. And because they consider the whole, or they consider the community, that's why, gentlemen, they communicate so well. Yes? And women come to conclusions differently than men without going through the methodical process. They trust their feelings. They trust their intuition. They're in touch with their emotions. They can surrender. Listen to this. They can surrender and trust an outcome without logically going through the steps that the man does. And any wise man, by the time he's 45, doesn't take counsel with a woman who's older and wiser is missing a great opportunity. So now listen. Think about this. Women's brains are wired for the whole, for trusting an outcome, for the intuitive process, to surrender to a concept. So that's why when they go Christmas shopping, they go to the stores and the men are walking behind them and they say, oh my God, let's get 2 of these. And let's get 3 of those. And let's buy those for next Christmas. And let's get that for our trip to Venezuela. And the man says, I'm going to go watch the soccer game. Come and find me. So now think about this. What are the 2 ingredients? By the way, there's a reason I'm telling you this. What are the 2 ingredients for creation? Thought and feelings. What are the 2 ingredients for creation? Intention and surrender. So men's brains, the reason I use so much science in my lectures is to get men to trust in an outcome they can't perceive with their senses. To surrender to the quantum field. Even though you can't see it or smell it or taste it or feel it or hear it, Can you believe in it even though it hasn't happened yet? So we have to provide the science for men to say, I got it. I understand. I can do it. So we have to teach men how to surrender. And women, of course, we have to teach them how to become clear, single-minded, to think about themselves instead of thinking about everybody else, and get clear in what they want. And you know that any man who is clear in what he wants and who is in touch with his emotions is a very attractive man. And a woman who is very single-minded and trusts in an outcome is a charismatic being. So it takes two ingredients. And the reason we know that, because there was an experiment done a ways back where they took DNA, you know DNA? And they put DNA into a vial. Now, this is for the men. And they said, we want you to intentionally, in your mind, these were with a group of skilled people who could pray. And by the way, prayer is a skill. They said, we want you to intend on this DNA unwinding. Focus and intend on it just unwinding. And at the end of the time frame, when they checked the DNA, guess what happened? Nothing. Then they took a group of people and they said, listen, we want you to move into an elevated state of joy and emanate goodwill and inspiration. Just do that around the DNA. And guess what happened to the DNA? Nothing. Nada. But when they said, now, we want you to intentionally focus on that DNA. We want you to move into this elevated state as if it already unwound. And feel how you would feel in that state of heartfelt emotion, of joy. And when they combine those two ingredients, thinking and feeling, 25% change in the DNA. So what are you thinking and what are you feeling every single day? Because your thoughts are the electrical field that you produce. That's intention. And how you feel is the magnetic field that you produce. And so our thinking and feeling produce an electromagnetic field around us that affects every single atom in your life. How many people believe that may be possible? Gentlemen, I'm not done yet. You got to see it to believe it. You got to believe it to see it. Now, I'm teasing him, but you know what? Our repetitive thinking and feeling, our repetitive behaviors, the concept in neuroscience. Are you guys still geniuses? Come on. Still geniuses? The concept in neuroscience says nerve cells that fire together wire together. So your repetitive thoughts and your repetitive actions, your behaviors and your intentions force neurons to fire and develop long-term relationships. So if you're thinking the same thoughts and performing the same actions every single day, could you understand how the brain would become hardwired into a certain pattern? 20 years of thinking and feeling and behaving the same way, the neurons become very finite set of circuits. When someone says you're thinking in the box, You're not thinking any other way but the way you typically think. So then to think outside the box is to force the brain to fire in new sequences, in new patterns, and in new combinations. The concept in neuroscience is called neuroplasticity. And what is the main ingredient to make the brain begin to fire in new patterns, to begin to think outside the box? The main ingredient is called knowledge. Learning. Every time you learn something new, you make a new connection in your brain. Learning is making new synaptic connections. Remembering is maintaining or sustaining those connections. So would you agree then as a genius that if you're making new connections, learning new things, wouldn't you agree that those new circuits you could use to make the brain fire in new ways? And do you think that you would perceive reality differently because of the new circuits you made? So I want to play a little game with you. Imagine I put up on the screen there a picture of a Monet painting. And I said, "Isn't that a beautiful painting?" And you would all say, beautiful, beautiful. And if I took that painting and I took it down off the screen, and I said to you, "You guys know anything about Monet? Do you know that he spent his whole life trying to see things differently? He was fascinated with light. He loved the light first thing in the morning, and he loved the light at sunset. And he tried to capture that light in his paintings so that when people saw his paintings, they would begin to look for it in nature and appreciate nature. And he was known to say things like, the bridge and the wisteria are one and the same. And as a child, his family owned a textile mill. And he would sit and watch the two fabrics come together. And he would trance on how they would form a pattern. And he wanted to paint that way. And as he got older, he developed cataracts in his eyes. Thick protein coating over the lens. And when he looked at the light, the cataract diffused the light. So he started to paint exactly what he was seeing in those impressionistic patterns. And when he was in his elder years, the doctor said, "Listen, you have cataracts. We can take those cataracts out." And he said, "Are you crazy? I spent 45 years of my life trying to see this way." Now, if I put that painting back up on the screen, would you see it differently? Come on. What's changed? Your mind changed. You made new connections, and because you made new connections, your brain is firing in new patterns, new sequences, and new combinations, and you're perceiving what always existed, but your brain wasn't wired to perceive it. Now, do you think you perceive reality based on how your brain is wired? What's the difference between the wine connoisseur and the person who drinks wine out of a box? The wine connoisseur had learned about wine. He experienced and paid attention to the flavors. He looked for the tannins and the oak. She smelled the aroma. And every time
they associated that smell with that taste, with that wine. They were enhancing the circuits and connections. And the person who drinks box of wine doesn't care about the taste. They want the high. And if you gave that Cabernet Sauvignon to the box of wine person, they don't have the circuitry to perceive reality the way the connoisseur does. Now, the person who lives in guilt and the person who lives in suffering, their circuits have fired and wired together to form a community of neurosynaptic connections, just like the wine connoisseur, more intricate circuits. In other words, their brain is a reflection of their mind. So would you agree then that the person who reads Braille, who's blind, and their two fingers is where their mind is? And they've fired and wired the same set of circuits in these two fingers mapped in this part of their brain over and over again, so well that more of that real estate in that part of the brain is for those two fingers. And if you did an autopsy of the Braille reader's brain that's correlated with these two fingers, more enriched connections. Because as we fire those circuits over and over again, over and over again, over and over again, there comes a moment where this chemical is released that causes neurons to develop a long-term relationship and sprout new intricate connections, more densely packed jungle of neurons. So then the brain is the reflection of the person's attention, intention, repetition, and learning, and instruction. So if the person is insisting on guilt, thinking the same thoughts and performing the same actions, would they have a more densely set of neurological circuits that's related to how they're thinking and feeling? So then here's my next question. If you accept that you perceive reality based on how your brain is wired, do you think you perceive reality based on how you're emotionally feeling? You do? You know, they did an experiment where they took a group of people, clinically depressed. And by the way, depression is so high in the United States right now. But you take a group of depressed people and you show them equal pictures of a wedding scene and a funeral scene. And then you call them into the lab a couple hours later. And you say, which slides were there more of? Wedding or funeral? They all say, oh my God. There were way more funeral scenes. If you show those same slides, equal slides, to people that are well-adjusted and happy, and call them into the lab an hour later, they see more wedding scenes. So we perceive reality based on how our brain is wired and how we emotionally feel. So we're back to thinking and feeling again. Now, how many people here know someone who, now, I'm taking a chance, who has mastered suffering? Come on, I had an Italian grandmother. I know this one really well. Listen, when my Italian grandmother said the rosaries, I thought there was a war coming or something. It was a very intense moment. I thought she was having a heart attack or a seizure or something. She was praying and suffering at the same time. And I don't know where I'm going. By the way, I grew up thinking Jesus Christ was Italian until I was in 4th grade. She was talking Italian to him. He looked Italian in all the pictures.
So you know someone who's mastered suffering, right? And my definition of mastery is when our internal chemical state is greater than anything in our external world. We've memorized the emotional chemical state, and nothing can change us. So you know someone who's mastered suffering, right? How do we know that? Because you say to them, hey, did you read that book that I gave you? No. Did you watch that DVD?
No. Hey, listen, we're going to go out to dinner. We're going to do dancing. We're going to go see some comedy. We're going to walk down the road and have some ice cream, and then we're going to meet up with some friends. You want to come? No. I've memorized this emotional state, and nothing in my environment, no person, no event, no experience, no condition, no thing is going to move me from this internal chemical state. That's mastery. Now, we have 3 brain systems in one. 3 brains that allow us to go from thinking to doing to being. And because we have these 3 brain systems, that person moved into a state of being so well that it is now an automatic subconscious state of mind. And that internal chemistry is so memorized that nothing can move them from it. And because we have 3 brain systems in place that allow us to go from thinking to doing to being, we can master an internal chemical state of joy. And we can insist on joy just as well as the person who suffers insists on guilt. And we can memorize that internal chemical state so well that nothing from our external environment can move us from it. Because the first brain that we have is the thinking brain. You're listening to me right now with your thinking brain. And as you pay attention, and as you begin to think in different ways, you're reinforcing circuits. You're learning philosophy and information. But that's not enough. We have to apply what we learn. We have to personalize it. We have to demonstrate it. We have to teach the body what the mind is intellectually understood. And when we get the body involved, when we modify our behavior, and we have a new experience, that new experience produces a new emotion. Because the end product of every experience is called an emotion. And feelings and emotions help us to remember experiences better. They tag the experience as important. You remember catching that fish off the coast of Cancun? You remember that surprise Christmas present? You remember your first kiss? All right, maybe your first You remember where you were on 9/11? You remember these things because something from the environment, some stimulus from the environment, produced some internal chemical change. And this external thing that produces some internal chemical change, you pay attention to. You say, what is this that's producing this feeling? Oh, it's that person, or it's that event, or it's this thing. And the identification with that external thing, with this internal change, says, that's a memory, because it's an event in and of itself. So now, with the new experience, in the midst of the experience, everything we're seeing and smelling and tasting and feeling and hearing, all of our 5 senses are sending sending information back to the brain through 5 different pathways. And it's causing gangs of neurons to string into place and to release chemicals. And those chemicals signal the body so that you can remember the event. So now we're conditioning the body to learn what the mind has intellectually embraced. Now we have 2 brains working together. The emotional brain, the limbic brain. Now, to get people to go from thinking to doing is like herding cats. Because most people, they want to stay locked in that intellectual realm. So let's just say you read a book on compassion by the Dalai Lama. And now you decide that you got some knowledge and you're going to forgive your mother-in-law. So you forgive your mother-in-law, and you have this new experience, and you feel good. But you can't be asked to be canonized as a saint now. You can't have the experience once. You have to be able to repeat the experience over and over again, over and over again. You got to make it look natural and easy and second nature. And when we repeat it over and over again, we activate that 3rd brain, that subconscious brain, the cerebellum, that is in a state of being now. We've practiced it so many times, we don't have to think about it any longer. And when we're in a state of being, our internal chemistry has been memorized. And now we master forgiveness. We master compassion. And we don't have to think about it because we are it. So now, living in that state of being means the electromagnetic field that's around us is working in congruence with the mind and the body. The mind and body are working together. And now we're in the natural state of being, and it takes no effort. It's second nature. It's simple. It's easy. And if we can master that internal chemical state, just like the person who suffers, now we're talking about change. Is unlearning that emotional state. What is the emotional state that you've memorized that you've decided that you are as a personality? That's not who you are. That's just some emotion that you think is who you are. So how does that happen? So you have an event in your life. Remember, experiences and events produce emotions. So you have an event in your life when you're 20 years old. And I don't know, I'm making this up. Your husband leaves you with 3 children. Okay? Now, that event produces some very strong emotions, right? And those emotions activate the primitive nervous system of survival, the fight or flight nervous system. And those chemicals of survival have us act in very predictable ways, bring up the negative emotions of fear and anger and hatred. You ever notice that when you're angry, you're frustrated? When you're frustrated, you hate. When you hate, you judge. When you judge, you're jealous. When you're jealous, you're envious. When you're envious, you're insecure. When you're insecure, you're competitive. When you're competitive, you're self-centered. When you're self-centered, you're important. When you're important, you're arrogant. Same chemicals driving the brain for thoughts and behavior. But did you ever notice that when you're in love, you're happy? When you're happy, you're allowing. When you're allowing, you're unconditional. When you're unconditional, you're inspired. And when you're inspired, you've got great ideas, and you don't hold on to things any longer. New chemicals driving our thoughts and driving our behaviors. So geniuses. The event happens. You're abandoned now, and you emotionally feel that feeling. Now listen to this. What people don't know is that as they remember the event, 2 years later, every time they remember the event, they produce the same chemicals in the brain and the body as if the event was happening. So your memory of the event signals the body. Suffer. 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 Suffer again. Suffer, suffer, suffer. So the redundancy of that, it goes event, produces memory. The memory then has an emotion that attached to it, and that emotion is called a feeling. So then every time the person thinks of the event that produces the memory, it reproduces the feeling of suffering. And they do this for years. The thought, the memory, the suffering. A year goes by, forget the thought, just the memory and the suffering. The memory and the suffering. The memory and the suffering. Forget the memory. Let's just suffer. That's who I am. So who are you? You say, who are you? Oh, let me tell you who I am. I'm the person who's suffering because my husband left me with 3 kids when I was 20 years old. And I'm going to tell you all about it. And as I tell you all about it, I'm going to work myself up into this state so that I can reaffirm my identity. So then the person who can't change, the person who says, you see, I'm this way because my husband left me when I was 20. What they're really saying is, I can't overcome my attachment or my addiction to this emotion. I can't get it off me, and it's so part of me that I'm going to tell you why I can't change. It's because of this event. Is that it's not the event. It's the emotion. And when we overcome the emotion, and we have a healthy life, and a new marriage, and a great lover that we never knew we could have, and someone who's self-supportive, and has brilliant ideas, and is not needy. Oh my God, you think you care? You say, I'm so glad my husband left me. Because I got something great now. But the person who holds on never has the experience. Now, let's play a little bit, all right? Let's suppose, by the way, you're a great audience, I want to say that. So great, so great, so great. You know, the greatest gift you could ever give anybody, as far as I'm concerned, the greatest gift you could ever give anybody is your attention. How often do we give our attention to somebody, our true presence of mind? That's the greatest gift you can give anybody. So I'm honored, by the way, that you're paying attention so well. So, can we play a little bit more? Geniuses? Let's suppose now your husband, before he left you, was abusive, was disrespectful, treated you less, but you had thoughts about that, you had experiences about it. He left you, and you reviewed, you thought about, oh, I should have said this to him, and and that time he did that, and you're thinking and feeling, and you're conditioning your body to be the mind of suffering. And you're neurologically wiring the circuits in place to memorize these hardwired circuits of suffering. The brain is reflecting how you're thinking and feeling and acting. Now let's just suppose we take your ex-husband, we put him in a straitjacket, we wrap him up, we put him in a cannon, he's going to be safe, don't worry. He'll be safe. And we shoot him to the moon. Now, here's my question. He's gone. Would you agree that your brain is still wired for suffering? Would you agree that your body is still conditioned for suffering? Brain and body, mind and body are in alignment. You're the master of suffering. So, would you agree that you perceive reality based on how your brain is wired? So, guess who you pick in the next relationship? Same guy, different haircut. And maybe age. Out of 1,000 people, you'll pick them out. Because your brain is looking for that to fulfill your emotional needs. You know how we know that? Did you ever meet someone for the first time? And you say, hi, how are you? What's your name? Sally. Hi, I'm Joe. And then you say, where are you from? Mexico. My wife is Mexican. Familiar person. Emotional connection. Ooh. Where do you live in Mexico, specifically? Oh, I had some friends that lived there. When did you live there?
All my life.
All your life. Well, I was there from 2002 to 2004. Do you know those people?
I don't.
You don't. Well, I know these people. You know, I went to a wedding, and were you at that wedding?
No, I wasn't. Yes, I was.
Yeah, you were. Oh, we have a familiar event. Emotional connection. You own those things? I own those things too. And you've had those experiences? I've had those experiences too. I like you. If emotions are the end product of experience, and we share the same experiences, wouldn't we share the same emotions? Come on, geniuses. We have an emotional connection if we know the same people, if we've done the same things, if we've been to the same places at the same time. Hey, and you've suffered as much as I've suffered. Hey, we got something in common. As long as you don't change, we're going to have a great relationship. Right? So, now let's just say, let's just say you have a person that you walk with every day and you complain about your life with. You know, you walk with your girlfriend and you complain about your boyfriends or your husbands. Or, you know, you have a friend that you golf with. Thank you. You have a friend that you golf with, and because you golf with this guy every day, you complain about business and the stock market and politics. And you have that emotional connection with them. Now, all of a sudden, you're going to change. And you're going to say, I'm not complaining anymore. I'm not blaming. I'm not making excuses. And I'm not feeling sorry for myself. And you're walking with your girlfriend, and she's going off, you know. And you're just walking, and she says, what is wrong with you today? Aren't you going to jump in with me? Or your friend, you know, you're golfing with, and you're playing great golf, and you're focused on the game, and he's complaining about all these things in his business, but you've decided not to complain anymore. They're going to say, hey, buddy, you okay? You're not going to suffer with me here? I like you better the other way. And so in the process of change, we break our connection with the external world. We break our connection with the environment. We break our connection to all the elements that reinforce the automatic programs to define us as an identity. Neuroscience and psychology tells us that the brain... You guys still geniuses? So I want to ask you a question. The brain is organized, according to neuroscience, to reflect everything that you know in your life. Everything you know in the environment. A chair, a book, a person, place you live, place you're going to go, things you do, things you can demonstrate. The brain is organized to reflect everything we know in the environment. So if the brain is organized to reflect everything in the environment, and our thoughts have something to do with our destiny, if the environment is causing us to think, if we're responding to the environment every single day by recognizing familiar people and familiar emotions and familiar places, wouldn't you agree then, if the environment is causing us to think, what are we creating more of the same? We're reinforcing the same circumstances in our life. In other words, as the environment causes us to think, we're only thinking equal to the environment, which causes the same things to unfold. To change is to think greater than the environment, to think greater than the circumstances in our life, to think greater than the conditions in our world. And by the way, geniuses, that's what we admire in history, the great people in history. Whether it was William Wallace, Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, charismatic leaders, Queen Elizabeth, they all said the same thing. They all said, you see, I have this dream. I have this vision. I have this idea. I can't get it out of my head. And, you know, even though this dream hasn't manifested yet, I can't see it yet, I can't smell it or taste it or feel it or hear it, I don't have the experience of it yet, but I'm going to live as if it's already happened. I'm going to live as if it's happening now. And I don't care what happens to my body. I don't care what happens, what the conditions are in my life. And I don't care how long it takes. I'm just going to live as if it's already done. Now that leader is a true leader. Do you know why? Because he has mind and body working together. She has behavior matching her intention. She has thoughts and actions aligned. Mind and body are working together. A true leader has mind and body working together. A politician has his mind doing one thing and his body doing something else. So, can you believe in a thought, a dream, a vision, that you can't perceive with your senses, but you've thought about enough times in your mind that your brain is reflecting the event ahead of the experience? If you can live by that law, you're living by the quantum law. We can prepare the brain, the mind, and the body ahead of the actual experience. And if the brain, the mind, and the body are ahead of the actual experience in the quantum field, the experience happened. Because the body and the mind are reflecting it already. So how does subjective mind affect the objective world? In other words, geniuses, does your environment control your thinking, or does your thinking control your environment? So if the brain and the mind and the body are ahead of the actual experience, and it looks like in the brain that the event happened, it looks like in the body's already changing as if the experience happened, wouldn't you agree then in the quantum field the event has happened? And now the event finds you. The quantum field rearranges your life. And it comes in a way you can't predict. And it's fun. And it's surprising. And it leaves no doubt that it came from this greater mind. Because if you can figure out how it's going to happen, it's not new. And the brain wouldn't change. It has to be a surprise. And the brain loves surprises. And so the brain is no longer a record of the past. But if the brain and the mind and the body are ahead of the experience, now the brain is a map to the future. And the privilege of being a human being is that we can make thought more real than anything else. And because we can make thought more real than anything else, the thought can become the experience. And all it takes is training the brain and the mind. And when we get truly serious and we make up our mind, you know, when you make up your mind about something, how many people have said, that is it, I am done? You know, that's the first time your body says, oh my God, he's actually serious today. Instead of, I think I'm going to get happy, you know, I think I'll start tomorrow. But why do we wait as human beings for crisis to happen for us to get serious? Why do we wait for tragedy before we make up our mind? Before we say, that's it? Great leaders in history never waited. They were possessed. You know, why do we talk ourselves out of greatness? We talk ourselves out of greatness because, you know, just because you have a thought doesn't necessarily mean it's true. And the moment that we realize that we can observe our thoughts and observe our actions without participating in them, we're on the first step to change. Because the privilege of being a human being says, because we have this big frontal lobe of ours, 40% of our entire brain, we have this faculty called metacognition that says we can observe our thoughts and observe our behaviors so that we can change our thoughts and change our behaviors so that we can produce a better outcome in our life. So that we can forecast an idea into the future. We can modify our behavior to do a better job. So the people in history that were great, they didn't wait for evidence. Their brain and their mind and their body were ahead of the event. And, you know, when we live with that type of idealism, we are believing in thought more than we're believing in the conditions in our world. Now, what is your definition of prayer? Isn't prayer believing in thought more than you believe in the environment? Aren't you believing in your intention more than you're believing in your circumstances? And because we all share the same brain anatomically, what do we do when we get in trouble in our lives? We all do the same thing. We eliminate the environment. We want to think without the environment. We want to close our eyes and say, this is what I want. I want this. And I'm going to intend on this. I need a change in my life. And I'm going to keep intending on this until some supernatural power comes in and reorganizes my life to reflect my intention. So prayer is a skill. And the skill is that we practice it and move into an elevated state of mind so that mind and body can work together. So, but we can't just do that like, you know, if we just talk about this without doing it, I call it dinner conversation. You know, good dinner conversation. Nobody's really changed. You argued concepts, and everybody's going to go back to doing what they do. So we wait for crisis to show up, because crisis means you don't want to keep your social agreements anymore. You don't want to, you can't go on as business as usual because you're hurting or there's pain. And you got to get serious now, because it's your health or your family or your life or your job. But we usually wait for crisis before we act. But if I told you that the body is a protein-producing machine. That skin cells make skin proteins. It's called collagen and elastin. And muscle cells make muscle proteins. It's called actin and myosin. And your stomach cells make stomach proteins. They're called enzymes. So the body is a protein-producing machine. Genes are expressed when they make proteins. Now, what turns on the gene are the chemicals from the brain that push the receptor sites that turn on the gene to make a protein. So if we keep thinking and feeling and feeling and thinking and making the same chemicals that activate the same receptor sites that turn on the same genes, we're going to start to wear those genes out. And you're going to start making cheaper proteins. And as we start making cheaper proteins, you're going to start to age. What is aging? All aging is improper protein production. What happens to your skin when you age? It wrinkles. Less collagen. What happens to your bones? They become brittle. Less collagen. What happens to your muscles? They atrophy. Less actin and myosin. So it's the redundancy of the same chemicals that activate the same genes that cause the body to move to its genetic destiny. So if we're not learning anything new, and we're not having any new experiences, now I'm not talking about eating Ethiopian food, or getting a new haircut. I'm not talking about new hairstyle. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about having your thoughts create your destiny. An unknown experience. If we're not having those events in our life, we're left with the genetic circuits that we've inherited from our parents. Which means we're going to think the same thoughts as our parents, behave the same way as our parents, and feel the same feelings that our parents felt. But neuroscience says that the brain is not hardwired, not as hardwired as we once thought. That learning and experiencing upscale the hardware of the brain. And that genes are as plastic and as changeable as your brain. But genes are like on-off switches. They're like lights. Certain lights are turned on and other lights are turned off. And the redundancy of thinking and feeling and feeling and thinking keeps signaling the same cell to keep certain lights on and the other lights off. But could we theoretically turn on new lights and turn off other lights? Is that possible? So, if you were to take the genes, the genes of one cell out of a skin cell, and you were to stretch it end to end, it would go 2 meters high. If you took all the genes out of your body and stretched them from end to end out of all the cells of your body and lined them up end to end, it would go to the sun and back 150 times. If you took all the genes out of the 6 billion people on the planet and you put them all together, it would fit in a grain of rice. And we express 1.5% of our genes. The other 98.5% is junk DNA. Out of that 98% that we express, we're 96% chimpanzee. 300 genes away from a chimp. 70% rat. But the genes are a library of potential. And we can turn on new genes and turn off old genes. You know how we know that? Because they're beginning to do experiments to say, we know that anger and pain and fear and anxiety and stress dysregulate genes to cause disease. 75 to 90% of every person that shows up at a doctor's office in the Western world shows up because of a stress-related disorder. And those chemicals of stress are what begin to break the body down. So they said, if these negative emotions make us sick, in other words, if our thoughts can make us sick, can our thoughts make us well? Good question, though, right? So they took a group of diabetics, type 2 diabetics, who are insulin dependent, developed diabetes later on in their life, turned on the genetic expression of diabetes. And they said, okay, one group is going to watch a boring, humorous lecture. We're going to feed them a very good meal, and then we're going to see what their blood sugar levels are. And their blood sugar levels went up about 123 points, which put them in the danger zone. So then they give them insulin. The insulin takes the sugar out of the bloodstream and deposits in the cells for energy. You guys still with me? Geniuses? Now they took another group of people and they had them watch a comedy show. For 1 hour they laughed. And they rated their laughter on a scale of 1 to 5. And this was a Japanese study. So for Japanese people to laugh, that's a big deal. I've been to Japan, I know. So it was a Japanese study. And now, after the comedy show, they measured their blood sugar levels. And those people who watched the comedy show, their blood sugar levels only rose about 70 points. Almost half of what the other people did. So then the scientists that did the experiment said, oh, well, you know, that's really simple. You start laughing, you contract your abdominal muscles, you contract your diaphragm, you're going to use up blood, sugar. But the geneticist that did the experiment, he tested the gene. Now check this out. They turned on some 23 genes in 1 hour just from laughing. 23 genes. They turned on new lights and they turned off old lights. In other words, the genetic expression of diabetes got turned off to some degree, and the genetic expression of health got turned on, regulating glucose, just from laughing. Now, did they say, oh, I got to think to my pancreas, you make insulin? Or did they just move into an elevated state of joy? Come on, which did they do? Why is it that when someone is subjected to stressful conditions in their life, that their hair turns gray overnight? Overnight. That's genes at work. So what genes are you turning on? What lights do you have on? And what lights do you have off? What have you memorized emotionally that you live by, that you think that is your identity? Because remember, we said thought, memory, feeling, thought, memory, feeling, memory, feeling, memory, feeling, feeling. This is who I am. Now, if we could remove that emotion that's driving your thinking, driving your behavior, and driving those other feelings, would you agree then you could unlearn that and make room to memorize a new emotional state? How many people think that's possible? Now, if you can get mind and body working together where you're not only thinking it, you're feeling it, and now your thinking, your intention is producing an electrical field, and your feeling is creating that magnetic field, and your electromagnetic field is joy, then wouldn't you agree then that something's got to show up unusual in your life? Because now you're living the prayer. You are it. You're being it. And the quantum field only responds to whoever we're being. who we're being, what we've memorized. So a person can say, I'm thinking positive. I'm thinking thoughts that are positive, but how are they being? Negative. So mind and body are in opposition. They could pray all they want for a great outcome, but if they're feeling the opposite, it doesn't work. Why does the placebo work? Why can you give someone a sugar pill? Why can you give them a saline injection? Why is it that you can fake a surgery? And people over 2 years are still better. Do you know why? Because they automatically started to think that they were better. And then they started to act as if they were better. Then they started to feel better. And their thinking and acting and feeling allowed that infinite mind in us to give life to whoever we're being. Now that infinite mind is in every human being, independent of their culture or their race or their gender or their creed. And so, however we're being, however we're thinking and feeling and acting, if the placebo was given and you're acting as if you're better and thinking as if you're better, the thinking and acting is going to produce a state of being. Thinking, doing, being. And then that subconscious mind that's giving us life, that's keeping your heart beating and digesting your food and filtering your blood, that's organizing all the events, it responds to whoever we're being. And it loves us enough to give us life on our terms. That unconditional. So, you may say, well, Joe, that subconscious brain that's keeping my heart beating, you know, in actuality, that's the autonomic nervous system that does that. The automatic nervous system. So then I would say, okay, let's look at the autonomic nervous system. Where in the autonomic nervous system controls the way your heart beats and regulates your blood sugar levels and keeps genes on and genes off? Oh, you have to look in the brain. Okay, let's look in the brain. What part of the brain? Oh, it's in the limbic brain. Okay, let's look in the automatic limbic brain. Let's look in the organ. Where in the organ is it? Oh, it's in these tissues. Oh, those tissues control those things? Okay, let's look at those tissues. Oh, in those tissues, it's those cells that do it. Okay, let's look at the cells. Okay, what are the chemicals in the cells that are making that happen? Oh, it's those chemicals. But who's giving the instruction to those chemicals to do that if they're just inert materials? Oh, it's the molecules and the chemicals that do it. Let's look at the molecules. What are the molecules? Oh, those are atoms. It's the atoms that are doing it. Okay, well, let's look at the atoms. Well, 99% of the atom is nothing. It's invisible. It's energy. It's electromagnetism that's instructing the atoms, which instruct the molecules, which instruct the chemicals, which instruct the cells, which instruct the cell membrane, which instruct the tissues, which instruct the organ, which instructs the system, which instructs the body. And that immaterial aspect of us that has a mind that's so much greater than our mind gives us life on our terms. And so, have you developed a relationship with that intelligence? Have you taken time to interact with that mind every day? Just like you have a relationship with your husband or your girlfriend or your wife or your dog or your cat or your kids, even though it's invisible. Have you taken the time to give thanks for your life? Have you taken time to say, how can I do a better job today? I want to surrender my suffering to this mind. I need your help. Why do we wait? for the end? Why not take care of the emotion that's going to lead to the physical manifestation later on in your life? Can you beat the health condition? And if you can get your mind and body working together and get that old mind out of the body and put a new mind in and maintain that modified state of being, your life should change. Now, if you gained a new mind that had new thoughts and new feelings, and you practice that every day, in the beginning it's going to become, it's hard. Just like learning how to play tennis. It takes a little practice. You've got to put all your attention on it. But if you keep going, it starts to become familiar, doesn't it? Now, do you know the definition of meditation? The exact Tibetan translation? The exact translation. Close. The translation means, meditation means, to become familiar with. That's it. Nothing mystical. We're going to demystify meditation. So, if you sat down and said, I want to change myself, I better become familiar with this feeling. Instead of turning on the TV, instead of getting on the computer, Latinos, instead of getting on the cell phone, set it down and say, what is this feeling? Ugh. I'm running from this feeling. I'm not going to run from it anymore. I'm going to look at it. And what are the thoughts that I think when I feel this way? How do I really think? How do I behave when this consumes me? I want to become aware of it. I want to make conscious what was once unconscious. And what are the other feelings that I work myself up into? Now, if you were able to do that and become familiar with your unconscious thoughts, your unconscious actions, your unconscious behavior, and your unconscious feelings, and you became conscious of them, would you be meditating? Come on, geniuses. Absolutely. Absolutely. Nothing mystical about that. We just went into the automatic program, we brought the material out, and we set it out, and we're looking at it. And if we can become conscious of it, guess what? Tomorrow, because we're aware, we say, anger is how I've lived my life, and if I respond now, I'm going to go unconscious, and it's going to be 8 o'clock, and I'm going to be gone. But if I restrain myself, because if I get angry, the only person I'm affecting are my own cells, not that person, but me. Guess what? I'm not going to respond. I love myself enough. This is loving to me to not do that. And you make a different choice. Would you agree that you're on a different future? And if you made that choice the next day and was able to do it day after day, would you agree that now you're on a whole new lifeline, a new timeline, a new quantum potential? This is how simple quantum physics is. You choose a change, and you maintain that change. You're going to be thinking and acting in different ways, and you're going to walk away from your genetic destiny. And you're going to keep practicing it until it becomes visceral, it becomes physiological, it becomes part of you. It is you. So then if I said to you, what is the greatest ideal of yourself? What would a great person think? How would a great person act? How would they feel? Would they be, my definition of inspiration is to move and act without consideration. When you're inspired, you're not considering obstacles. There are no obstacles. There's just life to live. And if I said to you, what's the greatest ideal of yourself? And as you began to fire and wire neurons by thinking in new ways. So if you can begin to think in new ways and become familiar with it because you're reviewing it over and over again, the repetition makes it familiar. Would you agree that you're becoming familiar with a new mind? Are you meditating? Absolutely are. And if you're expressing a new ideal of yourself, would you agree that that infinite mind that's moving through you, keeping your heart beating and digesting your food, and that same infinite mind that's keeping the planets rotating around the sun, do you think it could work a new opportunity for you in your life? It already is waiting. But we have to begin to think and feel differently. That means that you got to put a new mind in your body. And you have to unlearn that old self and relearn that new self. In neuroscience, it's called pruning. Pruning away the circuits. Because nerve cells that no longer fire together no longer wire together. And the hardware of the brain changes. And if you could at the same time think and feel in new ways, would you agree that you would be forming new circuits and connections that would be called sprouting in neuroscience? So we let down the old and we create the new. And not just saying you intellectually understand it, but now you're living as if the experience is happening right now. Now that is my definition of genius. To be uncomfortable in the beginning and to be okay with it. But pursue onward until it becomes familiar and easy and second nature. The word meditation in Sanskrit means to cultivate up a new self. How, if you're a Himalayan master and you come down out of the mountains and you're enlightened, and the farmers say, how did you do that? What do you think they're going to say? You got to dig up the old self, pull out the weeds, dig up the old crops, make room for the new, and we're going to plant a new self. To cultivate self is to meditate. And there's nothing mystical about it. The Buddhists talk about it in a simple way. What is that human aspect of yourself that's driven by destructive emotions? And get familiar with who you are. And think about it a lot. Observe yourself and your actions. And we'll give you the antidote. If it's anger, we'll teach you compassion. And that's a state of mind and body. And if it's jealousy, it's loving kindness. And that state of mind. And we can unlearn the old and replace the new. And human beings have unlimited potential because we have proof in our brain and in our genes that we're much more than we think. It's that we talk ourselves out of greatness every single day. And we believe that that's true. And because we don't have any ideals in the world, we tend to fall to our lowest denominator. And we suffer quietly, thinking that there's no hope. And yet, the great people in history understood that they started out unconsciously unskilled. They didn't know that they didn't know. And then they became consciously unskilled.